Hey everybody, it's Courtney. Today I'm creating a card using one of the newer stamp sets by Neat and Tangled. This is called Snow Fun. And when I got this set of sequins. And although I didn't use them for this particular card, I wanted to stick with that color combination. So I'm starting off with a piece of Simon Says stamp masking paper here that is cut just a little bit bigger than my card panel. And I use a circle die to cut the circle out of that. And I'm just rubbing this against my arm just to kind of make it a little less tacky. That way it won't tear my paper when I rip that up. I centered that right in the middle of my card panel here. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my images with blackout ink by Ink on 3. And this is a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I stamped out 3 of the images within the stamp set. And I also have my masks cut from Simon Says stamp masking paper, and I will go ahead and mask these out as well. Now, for the bottom of the little snowman there's a little bit of snow, and I wanted this to continue on. So I'm using an EK Success journaling pen, and I'm just going to draw in the rest of my snow to make it all the way across my little circle there. Then I'll take a piece of Eclipse masking paper. And I didn't use the Simon Says stamp here for this because I can see through the Eclipse masking paper. I just laid that over where I had drawn in that snow, traced it on my masking paper, and I'll cut that out in order to mask out the bottom part of my little circle scene there. And then we'll move on to the ink blending. For my main background, I should say, I am going to be using 3 different colors. I'm going to be using Picked Raspberry, Salty Ocean, and no, I lie. I used Wilted Violet, Mermaid Lagoon, and Picked Raspberry. So I'm putting the Picked Raspberry on the bottom, the Wilted Violet in the center, and the Mermaid Lagoon on the top. And I'm going with a very light hand to begin with. And once I reach the top, I'll work my way back down. And this is where I'll go in with a little bit of a heavier hand. And this is when I'll work on actually blending the colors together. You'll see sometimes I'll go in with my ink blending tool without actually putting any more ink on it. I'll just go in with whatever ink is on there. Other times I may add a little bit more if I want a little bit more color or if I'm having a hard time blending it. Once my ink blending was complete for the top portion of my card, I took some shimmer spray and shook this up really good. You can see that it settles towards the bottom. And I just took the nozzle and splattered that around and dabbed that up with a paper towel. Then I just removed the Eclipse masking paper. And I'm going in with Shaded Lilac with a very, very light hand. And I'm starting right on my mask. I want this to be very faint. I'm not worried about it having all that much color. I just don't want it to be completely white. Then I let this sit for a few minutes. Because the Distress Oxides stay wet for a while, plus we added that shimmer spray, if you remove your masks when it's still wet, you have a good chance of tearing your paper. So you can see how those areas that we splattered the shimmer spray on seeped right through that masking paper. So if it was still wet, those areas might tear your paper. So I went ahead and carefully removed all my masks, and we'll move on to the Copic coloring. Here, part of my mask came up a little bit as I was doing my ink blending. I just went in with a white gel pen and fixed that area up. I tried to pick colors that pretty much matched my background the best I could. So I'm starting off with a little snowman's hat, and I'm starting off with my lightest color and mapping out my darkest areas, which will be right above where the bottom part of his hat meets the top part and where it's folded over. Then just putting a faint line just with the tip of my marker with the darkest color, blending that out with my 2 mid-tone colors, and you'll see where the part of his hat that kind of folds down, I'm leaving a very small highlight there just so that I don't have 2 dark areas right directly next to each other. Otherwise, it would just kind of all blend in together. Finally, I went in with my lightest color, blended all of that out, and I'm going to pretty much color this little bird's hat the same way, only I'm using some V markers, again, trying to just stick to the colors that I used for the background. This is a really tiny little hat. You didn't have to use 4 colors here, but I just wanted to keep everything kind of consistent. For the little burr sign, I'm going to go in with some blues that closely match the Mermaid Lagoon. Now I'm concentrating my shading on the the left hand side, as if my light source is to the right, but I don't know why I shaded both sides of the sign. I ended up putting on the sign itself shading on both sides and kept a center highlight on that part, but on the post, I guess, I did keep with that right hand side light source and kept my shading off to the left. But I'm using a 4-color blend here, again going in with my lightest color, then my darkest color, my 2 mid-tones, and then I'll go back to my lightest color just for that small highlight area. For my little bird, I'm going to be coloring him yellow, even though that's not in the background. I'm going to start again with my lightest color, mapping out my darkest areas, which will be underneath his little hat and off to the left side of him and underneath his little wing. Then I'll go in with my darkest color, which is, even though it's a Y marker, it's more of an orange than a yellow, but that's okay because this is my dark color. Blend that out with my 2 midtones, then back to my lightest color. I did color his little beak in with the Y38, which was my darkest color, and I really just put a dot here. It's really tiny. You don't have to do any shading at all on this. Now for the snowman's little scarf, I wanted to incorporate all of the colors. So at first I'm just going in with my lightest colors and just mapping out which ones I want purple, which ones I want pink, blue, and yellow, etc. And I'm trying to keep with the same pattern, but I messed it up. So I don't think anybody will notice that I didn't keep with the same order, but this was kind of just to give myself an idea of which ones I wanted to color which color. Then I'll go in with my shading afterwards. Now I left out the darkest color on these, even though I used the same color combination. I just left out the darkest color. I just did three color blends here, and I'm concentrating on the part of the scarf that hangs around his neck. The shading will be underneath his little chin and off to the left. For the part of the scarf that's hanging over his body, the shading would be off to the left. And for the piece of the scarf that hangs over that piece, or under that piece rather, it would be on either side. Blending those out with my mid-tone, then my lightest color, and again colored all of these the same exact way, same color combinations as I used for the rest of the images. For his little carrot nose, I just used 2 colors here, covered the entire thing with the lightest color, just added a little bit of shading underneath. Couldn't really tell. Like I said, it's very small areas. You don't necessarily need to add too much shading. Now for the white areas, we'll start off with the snowman and the snow on top of that little sign. I'm going to go in with my C3, and I'm just going to be adding some shading where the areas would be the darkest. So underneath his hat and underneath where his little scarf is, and where he's kind of, the bottom part of him is kind of buried underneath that snow. And for the sign, I'm just putting a little bit of shading on the bottom and off to the left. Then I'll go in with my C1 and drag that color out a little bit, but still leaving pretty much the entire snowman white. This is just the shading itself. Anything that's white is going to be white, but it's still going to have shading. So it's not always going to be a stark white image. You're still going to have shadows. To eliminate some of those flick lines that I had created with the C1, I don't have a C marker that's lighter than that. So I just quickly go over that area with my colorless blender, and that will kind of get rid of some of the flicks, but still keep your shadows. For the base of his hat, as well as the little bird, I'm going to make this just a little bit darker, but still, it will still appear white. I'm going to start with my C5. This is a round object, so because it's around his head. So I'm going to keep my highlight in the center, blend out the C5 with the C3, and then finally go in with the C1, leaving that middle part still white. And again, going with my colorless blender very quickly just to get rid of some of those flick lines. For his little buttons, I just put a little C on just the left part with the C5 and blended that out with the C3. Now, some of the lines within the stamped images kind of disappeared a little bit because of the Distress Oxides. Distress Oxides are more opaque or opaque. My mom insists that it's opaque. I'm not sure how to say it, but basically they'll lighten up those black lines that you had from your stamp. So I'm just going to take that same EK Success journaling pen that I had used to create the rest of my snow and just go over some of those areas where the lines aren't as bold and black as the rest of them. Once I had that done, I took my white gel pen and added a few highlights to the little snowman's hat and the bird's hat, as well as the little sign and little parts of his scarf as well. I also filled in any areas that may have had a small white highlight around my stamped images where maybe I didn't mask it correctly. I just took a Copic marker that was the best fit for whatever background that was covering, just to fill in those areas so I didn't have that white highlight. Once all of my coloring was done, we'll move on to the sentiment. My original goal was to make this appear as if it was a snow globe and put the sentiment strip on the bottom part of my circle. I did keep with that plan, but it didn't look anything like a snow globe. So I'm taking a piece of black cardstock from my scrap bin here. I treated that with an anti-static tool, stamped my sentiment with Versamark ink, sprinkled on some white embossing powder, and went ahead and heat set that. Then I'll cut that into a strip. Now this is just as long as my card panel here right now. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to just adhere this flat to a card base the way it is, but I ended up trimming down my panel just a little bit on either side. You don't really have too much room to work with here because my circle was so large. And then I cut a small, really, really skinny strip of that same black cardstock. And I'm just going to adhere this to one side of my card panel once I have everything down onto a card base. So before I adhered everything, I did add some shimmer with an Nuvo Aqua pen to just the snow part of the snowman. I didn't do the snow on the bottom, just the snowman and the little bit of snow that's on top of that little sign. And I used my Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere everything down to an A2 size card base. This is the top folding card base. And I adhered that strip off to the left-hand side. You just want to make sure that you're using a real small amount of glue because it will squish out as you're adhering this down. And finally, I took some Scotch foam tape and popped up my sentiment. I did end up trimming a little bit down from either side so that it wasn't as long as my card panel itself. And that is it for today's card, guys. All the supplies that I used will be listed in the description below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.